This chapter deals with the preparation and use of master culture slants in order to store our cultures long term. As this segment starts, we will be soaking some medical tongue depressors in water. One of the things that I have found is that if we will put a little bit of wood into each of our test tubes, the mycelium will then move into the wood and colonize it, and our cultures will last much longer under refrigeration. This works whether it is a wood decomposing mycelium or not. It really does seem to help. So as this segment starts, we'll soak the wood, we will drop a piece into each test tube, and then we will mix up a batch of agar and pour it into our test tubes and sterilize it. When the test tubes come out of the pressure sterilizer, we're going to lay them at an angle so that as the agar cools, it'll solidify into a slant. Then later on, we will be inoculating those with mycelium from petri dishes that we have already proved to be contaminant-free. Later in this chapter, we will then take some master culture slants out of the refrigerator and use those to inoculate petri dishes in order to perpetuate the cycle. So let's watch. Incidentally, I only soak those medical tongue depressors for about a half an hour before I put them into the test tubes. That's probably not even necessary, but it does keep them from floating when you pour your agar in. Now the next step is to mix up a batch of agar as we covered in the previous chapter, and unless I'm working with a particular type of mycelium that doesn't like it, I just use malt extract agar for everything, the basic MEA. And you want to fill these test tubes about a half to 2/3 full. Once you get them filled up, take a paper towel and wipe the area around the threads and then screw your lids down tight. I screw them all the way down tight, and then take it over to the sink and wash off any agar that you spilled before you put them in the pressure cooker. The next step is to sterilize them. I like to give them about 20 minutes at 15 psi or 100 kPa. Now, because of the fact that we screwed the lids on tight, you don't want to do anything to speed up the cool down process or you'll end up exploding your test tubes. Just turn the stove off when your time expires and walk away. When you come back and you can handle the pressure cooker without burning your hands, go ahead and take the tubes out. They'll still be liquid, and just lay them at an angle to cool. You want to give them about a 25 to 30 degree angle, as you can see in this picture. Just use anything you have handy around the house. I use the weight from the pressure cooker, but just anything you have to get them at an angle about like this will work fine. One thing that I will be repeating over and over again during this entire section on agar, and especially here when we're working with master culture slants, there just is not a place you can cut corners with your sterile procedure. We're going to be saving these cultures for sometimes a couple of years before we get them back out again. So any molds, any bacteria, just any contaminants whatsoever, and your cultures will be ruined. So this next scene is going to open when I'm already about to make the transfers, but understand the flow hood has been running for about 2 hours, and during that 2 hours, the air has been sanitized with an antibacterial spray. I've taken a shower and washed my hair, brushed my teeth, used mouthwash. I get dressed with clean surgical scrubs that have come right out of the laundry. I put on surgical gloves and Tyvek wrist sleeves. I have a surgical mask, a hairnet on. All of the surfaces of the table have been wiped down with alcohol. including the wire rack you see that is used to elevate the Petri dishes up into the flow of the hood. The face of the flow hood itself was sprayed with disinfectant spray prior to turning it on. The test tubes themselves have been washed with alcohol, and you just saw that I sanitized the surface of the Petri dish we'll be transferring from with alcohol. Notice that in order to minimize exposure, I opened the lid of the Petri dish, made a very small cut, took the piece of mycelium on the scalpel, and then closed the lid of the Petri dish before opening the lid on our test tube. Once the lid on the test tube was open, I quickly made the transfer, then put the lid right back on the test tube. This minimizes any possible exposure to contaminants during your transfer. You always want to pay very close attention that no part of your hands ever comes between the flow hood and either your test tube or the piece of mycelium on your scalpel. This can blow contaminants from your hands into your culture media. Always stop and label each series of test tubes after inoculation. You can see here I had a stack of Petri dishes that day and a whole rack of test tubes that I was inoculating, so if you don't label them right away, at the end of the session you won't have the slightest idea what test tube got inoculated with what Petri dish. I'll be reminding you again and again throughout this video to always flame sterilize between each and every transfer. It's really the only way to prevent cross-contamination. Here's another method of holding the lid. You'll see I keep the lid in the little finger of the same hand that has the culture on the scalpel. This is the way I usually do it. It's the easiest for me. You can see it's a pretty small piece of tissue I transfer into each test tube. Since no culture is 100% sterile, the smaller the piece of tissue you transfer, the less chance of there being contaminants on board. After you make your transfers, you want to wrap each of your test tubes with a gas-permeable film. It's easier for me as I'm working to just go ahead and screw the lids down tight and get them out of the way. But as soon as we get finished, you want to back the lids off one full turn and then wrap them with a breathable tape. This provides for gas exchange. You'll notice after I cut off a length of parafilm, I fold it in half lengthwise. This doubles it up. I then loosen up the lid on the test tube a full turn and then wrap several layers around it. This provides for gas exchange, and it also helps to slow down the rate of evaporation. Doing it this way, I can easily leave these test tubes in the refrigerator for up to 2 years without them drying out. At that point, I'll get them out, inoculate a Petri dish, allow the Petri dish to colonize partially, and then from the leading edge of the Petri dish, I'll take another sample of mycelium and re-inoculate a fresh test tube slant, and I can keep the same culture for many, many years this way. Finally, we're going to simply reverse the process and take some mycelium from a test tube and move it to a Petri dish. About once a year, you're going to want to pull your culture slants out of the refrigerator and do this if you don't use wood. If you put a piece of wood in, as shown earlier, you can easily leave your culture slants in the refrigerator 2 and even 3 years without problems. But when you do take them out, you want to clean the slant very well with alcohol. Of course, follow all sterile procedures and transfer a small piece of mycelium from your test tube slant over to a petri dish. I like to remove my test tube slants from the refrigerator about a week before I'm going to be using them and leave them sitting at room temperature so the mycelium can rejuvenate and start to grow again before you make the transfer. If your intention is to simply make another test tube slant to return to the refrigerator, allow your mycelium to grow out on a petri dish for about a week or so. As soon as you get some good healthy growth, at that point go ahead and transfer to a fresh test tube. Don't allow it to grow any longer than necessary. Again, as we did in the first chapter, always wrap your petri dishes and your test tubes with a gas-permeable film, and don't forget to stop after each group of transfers and label with the date, species, and strain. Well, I hope this chapter has answered your questions and given you a basis to get started on your own experiments with. So, as with anything in mycology, the best way to learn is to simply roll up your sleeves and go for it. So get started and good luck to you.